Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Fleeting Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Read anything good in the newspaper lately? Maybe an obituary? I know I have, and I'd like to share it with you all. So, settle in by your monitor screens. It's time for Doughboy420's Obituary 2, Runnin' with the Devil.
The newspapers were flying off the shelves. Giant, bold letters plastered the front page of every local paper. Boy becomes double hero. Hero high schooler saves the day once again. Massacre ended by teen hero. The news stories went on and on, endlessly about the murders. The town could no longer keep this under control. They desperately tried to silence the spread of this new killing spree, but they could not keep up with the flow of information and the glare of the spotlight. Their secret was out. Sawyer Hansen got his wish of bringing the lies into the open, and Doug Spencer got his wish of being part of the legend of Locust Lake, both of them cemented in stone as the monsters they were for eternity. But Jason Hodder still had work to do to bring his dream of vengeance to fruition. He sat, dressed in a black suit and matching tie, feigning sorrow the best he could, tears rolling down his cheeks, sobbing, tissues clenched tightly in his hand. He was a much better actor than he gave himself credit for. As they laid Michelle into the ground, he gazed up at all the funeral goers. He saw Michelle's mother and father. Now they only had each other as they sat quietly nearby. He saw her cousins, aunts, and uncles, all mourning the loss. But Michelle's sister was nowhere to be seen. She didn't even attend her own sister's funeral. She really is more of a monster than I am, Jason thought to himself. The fake hero looked around for Lillian. Something caught his eye. A shadowy movement off in the distance. As his tired eyes adjusted, the image of a pale devil mask adorned in a black robe could be seen lurking behind a tree, far off at the edge of the cemetery. He almost allowed himself to fall out of character as he stared at the figure for a moment, shocked by what he was seeing. People began to leave as the casket settled into the dirt, and as the people passed him by, he lost sight of the figure in the devil mask, as if they'd never been there at all. He figured his eyes and his brain were playing tricks on him, after all the terrible things that he had done, and shrugged it off. He couldn't let guilt get to him. Not now. Not while his bait was set. With everyone in mourning and on edge after what he had done, he knew it would be more difficult to snuff out his next targets. If his victims wouldn't come to him, he would have to go to them. And he would have to get a little more creative to do it. He didn't wait long either. The night of Michelle's funeral and the night before the services for his best friend, Adrian, he lurked outside a small house at the edge of a cul-de-sac, his eyes peering through the newest incarnation of the devil mask. His mask. The obituary devil ducked behind the hedges that lined the yard of 1428 Pine Ave. A couple in their 40s sat inside in silence, deep in their thoughts of having to lay their daughter to rest the next day. Mr. and Mrs. Field, Adrian's parents, sat on the living room couch, while her brother, Alan, lay in his bedroom, grieving on his own. The three of them had no idea that they would soon be joining their dearly departed. He checked their side door first, and as luck would have it, in their absent-minded sorrow, they neglected to lock the door after taking the garbage out. The murderer passed through the threshold of the door and entered into the dark kitchen of the quiet home, his gloved fingers slowly passing over the surface of the counter as he found a wooden knife block near to the stove, where he acquired his next murder weapon for the night. A large butcher knife was removed from the knife storage block, with a faint sound of metal passing through its wooden sheath. In the living room, the two melancholic parents sat side by side, holding hands, their heads resting tilted against each other as they sat softly sobbing in silence. The devil brought the blade around in front of them in one fluid motion, pulled it horizontally across their throats, which instantly began gushing with blood as they gripped them, struggling to maintain life for just a few moments longer as the murderer left them to quickly bleed out before he moved on to their son's bedroom. Inside, the teenager lay asleep in his bed, curled up on his side with headphones on, listening to music. The obituary killer approached the side of the bed, raised the bloody kitchen knife into the air, and drove it down into the side of the boy's head with great force, crunching through his skull and piercing his brain. The next day, when Adrian's funeral came and her family were no-shows, people quickly became concerned, and within an hour, the police and paramedics were at 1428 Pine, pulling bodies out of the home and investigating the message left scrawled out on the living room wall. "Come home," in all capital letters, written in blood. Once again, the entire town went into a panic. People locked their doors and bolted their windows, hiding inside of their little boxes. But they weren't safe, and the obituary killer was only just getting started. After the Sawyers' killings, the entire town turned on his family. Those who were once well-respected members of the community had become the target of the rumor mill and the quarry of harassment and threats. And when the killings started up again, the Hanson family was hit with rampant persecution from all sides. Toby Hanson sighed as he closed the mailbox, not wanting to clean out the fourth large, sloppy dog turd left smeared inside. He missed his brother, but he also hated him for what he did, and what he caused his family to endure. They didn't do anything. They were good and caring people. It wasn't their fault that Sawyer was messed up in the head. The house was covered with eggs and toilet paper, as if they'd given out pennies on Halloween. But it wasn't Halloween. It was the beginning of summer, and Toby had to quickly duck inside to avoid another barrage of eggs thrown by local kids on bicycles. "Murderer!" one called out. "Psycho house!" another yelled. Toby quickly shut the door behind him, embraced himself against it as he heard the sound of cracking and splattering eggs thumping on the other side of the door behind him. The teen walked through the house and into the kitchen, where his mom looked like a wreck, up all night with a coffee in her hand. She looked ragged and disheveled. His father was balding, and with all the stress of the last couple of weeks, he was losing even more hair, and he too looked like he hadn't slept in days. "More eggs?" Mr. Hanson asked his son. "Yep," Toby sighfully replied, before washing his hands and sitting down at the table for dinner. "I wish they would just leave us alone," Mrs. Hanson said sadly. It was then that the family was startled by the sound of smashing glass coming from Mr. Hanson's home office in the adjoining room. The family entered the study to find that one of the windows had been shattered across the desk and hardwood floor. A brick lay on the edge of the rug beneath the desk. "God damn it! Leave us alone! Just leave us alone!" Mrs. Hanson screamed out the broken window. Mr. Hanson consoled his wife the best that he could as Toby left the room to retrieve the dustpan and broom from the hallway closet. But when he reached for the handle to the closet door, some movement out of the corner of his eye caught his attention. The front door was open and swaying gently in the breeze from outside. Toby's stomach sunk to the floor as fear began to take hold. He looked around before moving to the closed door, half expecting to be ambushed by angry locals wanting revenge, but after a long while of being cautious, he eventually sighed in relief, feeling more at ease, and began to think that maybe he just didn't latch the door properly when he entered. Then, as he was beginning to feel safe once more, that feeling had become like the window shattered, when his mother let out a blood-curdling scream. Quickly, the boy ran back into the kitchen to find his father, face down in his cereal bowl, the milk turning a dark color red, while his mother was backed up against the counter, trying to defend herself from a man in an almost Venetian-style devil mask. When Toby entered the room, both his mother and the man in the white, print-covered mask looked up at the teen, before the devil took advantage of this distraction and drove the kitchen knife into the woman's chest, piercing her heart as her son turned and fled from the house, the obituary killer giving chase quickly thereafter. Toby ran out the front door and leapt from the deck to the ground, skipping over the stairs entirely before turning to flee through his yard toward the nearest house. The obituary devil chased the teen through his yard and into the adjoining cemetery that separated his house from the nearest occupied home. The devil was an athlete, so catching up to his prey was fairly easy for the man in a black robe and a pale devil mask. He grabbed a hold of the teen and dashed his head against the gravestone before finishing off with several stabs, and it was where the body was left that sent another message. When the caretaker of the cemetery went for his daily check of the grounds, he found a stab wound-riddled corpse of the boy, laying propped up against the headstone of Michelle Harris's grave. The message was loud and clear, but Jason really wanted to hammer it home and to make sure that he really got his point across. Jason was beginning to get angry that his ultimate target would not show herself no matter what he did, no matter how clear his messages were. She would not come out of hiding. He would frequently drive past the Harris house in order to hopefully catch a glimpse of some sign of Lillian Harris, so that he could finally enact his revenge, a vengeance that he spent years planning and perfecting. It was one such occasion, as he was passing through the underpass of the railroad crossing, he once again noticed a robed figure, just standing there beyond the trees at the edge of the bridge, looking down at him. But he lost sight of the devilish shadow as he passed under. Quickly, the young man drove his truck around by the old railroad station and up the hill to the tracks where he had seen the figure. Jason got out of his truck, knife in hand, and began to search for whoever was pretending to be him. But he once again found nothing. There was no one there. Even though he searched for some time, he found nothing, and was left alone in his thoughts, fearing that he was indeed going crazy from what he had done, what he had put himself through. The man tried to shut out the feeling of dread that he was experiencing. He had to do what he had to do, and nothing was going to stop him, not even his own mind. That night, Jason took the same route once more, driving under the railroad crossing and on past the Harris home, driving his truck around the corner to go to the park near the edge of town, where he would pull over, don his robe and the obituary plaster mask, and become the obituary devil to wreak havoc once more. This is where a candlelight vigil was being held for the victims of the devil, at the park where most of them played throughout their childhoods. The people here were told to stay indoors by the authorities, but they chose to ignore the warnings, to pay respects to lost friends. There were a couple dozen or so people gathered around a large tree that separated the basketball court from the play area for the smaller kids. Here is where many children carved their initials, including some of the victims of the recent slayings.
N.V. Nathan Vernon, F.B. Felicia Baker, R.C. Robert Cougar, H.A. Heather Anderson, M.H. Michelle Harris, A.F. Adrian Field.
A young man spoke to those gathered by the tree, ignoring the now scratched-out initials of S.H. Sawyer Hansen and D.S. Doug Spencer.
These are just a few of those we lost recently. Though their names aren't carved out in this old oak tree, their memories still live on within each of us.
The blonde-haired, blue-eyed teen spoke with meaning, and as he delivered his moving words, the one responsible for many of these deaths lurked around the darkness and bushes at the edge of the park, out of view of those gathered in mourning.
"Thanks, Charlie,"
a petite girl said as she then got to speak up.
"Charlie Vincent, everyone."
She reintroduced the previous speaker, getting a round of applause and cheers for his heartfelt words.
"My name is Mika Carpenter, and I sat next to Penny Curry in several classes for the last 3 years. We weren't, like, super close friends or anything, but we talked. We talked every day. So she's very much a part of my life, and I'll miss her dearly."
The short redhead spoke up. One by one, these people all got up and spoke kind words about those that were no longer with them. Many of them were honest feelings and memories, while others were people that just talked out their asses, pretending to know the deceased in order to make themselves part of the tale. As Kirsty Barker was relaying a story about how she and Adrian used to play together in early morning elementary school, the devil pulled his obituary-covered mask up and hid it beneath his hood, where he used his familiarity as a tool to lure in the first person he could find.
"Psst! Hey, Wes! Come here!"
Jason whispered loudly, where he successfully got the attention of Wesley Thompson. They'd known each other for years, ever since Wesley's dad took over the newly remodeled Rex's Bar on Main Street. Wes noticed his friend and sauntered silently on over to Jason, but as soon as the guy rounded the corner made by the grouping of trees, the white mask of the obituary devil jumped out at him from the shadows, stabbing him in the neck to silence any chance of a scream before letting him drop and moving to his next victim. After Kirsty left the area around the tree, she made her way toward her car to grab a cigarette, and this is where she found the point of the obituary killer's blade as it pushed into her stomach, a gloved hand coming up to cover her mouth and muffle her screams as she was stabbed several more times before she was pulled out of view and hidden in the shadows. As Bruce Williams was rambling on with some bullshit story about fishing with Felicia Baker and her grandma, the obituary devil would strike again after Charlie Vincent stepped away to take a phone call. The popular teen finished the call with his mother, telling her that he would be home within the next hour, but this was the last she would hear from him, for as soon as she tapped the screen to end the call, The blade of a hunting knife forced its way through his left orbital bone, thrusting inward and through the soft, fatty tissue of his brain. The devil had to act quickly, though, because Charlie dropped right at the edge of the blacktop of the basketball court, and now Mika Carpenter was on her way toward her house on the far end of the park. The obituary killer waited for the girl to stumble across the corpse of her deceased friend before he struck. He jumped out of the shadows and placed his gloved hand over her mouth, driving the knife into her side from behind. But as he withdrew the blade and began to swing for a second plunge into her abdomen, he stopped and stared straight ahead, confused by what he was seeing. There, straight ahead of him, was the familiar face of the obituary devil staring back at him from the darkness, almost as if he were looking in a mirror. The devil stopped his assault and dropped the poor girl onto the pavement with a hard thud before taking off on foot, sprinting as fast as he could toward the familiar face in a black robe that ducked through a gate in the fence and into an alley behind some apartment buildings. The devil followed himself into the alley, where he saw the figure pass around a corner on the sidewalk at the end of a row of apartment buildings. He quickly followed, chasing the doppelganger around the corner, just a few yards behind him, but when he rounded the corner, he found nothing. Not a single sign of any presence at all. Jason stood there for a moment, breathing heavy. He was sure that he saw someone. He knew he saw someone wearing an identical Venetian-style devil mask, plastered with the obituaries of the victims of Locust Lake. He was sure of it. Or was it his mind playing tricks on him? Was he losing it? Did he finally crack and allow his demons to catch up to him? He began to sweat and panic, which was even further enforced by the sounds of Mika calling for help and the screams of people that began to find the bodies. He'd allowed someone to live to tell the tale of how she survived the obituary killer, another to join the survivor club of only one other member. Little did she know that the one other member was the very same slasher that stabbed her through the torso. Things didn't go according to plan, and now one of his victims got away, all because he kept seeing things, and he was sure that he was losing it. His victims were haunting him, using the image of his own malice against him to further break an already broken mind. The devil would not let a victim live for long. Anyone that got away would be dealt with before his plan could go to fruition. He was a perfectionist, and he planned for everything. Mika Carpenter became a town celebrity pretty quickly. She had a lot of visitors, but her room had a police guard posted right outside at all hours. Jason took advantage of his celebrity position once more, and used that to gain access to her room. The poor girl was asleep, exhausted and recovering, and Jason decided not to wake her. He wasn't there to speak with her. He simply needed her room's phone number. "Goodbye, Mika. I'll see you around," he said quietly, with a cold, faint smile, just slightly arched at the corner of his lips. Jason? The girl stirred awake as he was going to leave. Hey, Mika. How you feeling?" He turned to ask her. "Better, but it still hurts some," she replied. "Yeah, I totally get that," Jason said, lifting his shirt to show the still healing scar of his wound from Sawyer. "So, what's the famous Jason Hodder doing coming around here to see me?" Mika asked. "Oh, don't you know? You're famous now, too. Welcome to the club," Jason answered. "The Victims Club," Mika replied with shame. "Survivors Club," Jason replied. We beat them. Don't forget that. Jason told the girl, filling her with a sense of hope that he intended to snatch away before ending her life. Jason picked up a prepaid phone at a gas station after leaving the hospital, and that night he began to take away that hope that he had given when he called her room. It was getting late, and she was tired, so when the phone rang, it startled her awake and caused her to question who would be calling at this time as she reached to remove the telephone from its hook before placing it up to her ear to answer.
Hello?
Mika said, kind of half asleep.
Hello, Mika.
A deep and strange-sounding voice spoke from the other end of the line.
Who is this?
Mika asked.
Jake, if that's you and Mom finds out that you're prank calling me in the hospital, she's gonna be pissed,
she added.
Your initials aren't on that tree, Mika.
The voice spoke.
What did you say?
The girl asked, her tone changing to one of concern.
Maybe I'll carve them into you before I rip you out of that hospital bed and throw you out the window,
the voice said, with a bit of restrained rage.
There's a cop right outside my room, asshole. I'd like to see you try.
Mika raised her voice before slamming the phone down on the receiver, only for it to begin ringing mere seconds later.
What do you want?
Mika answered in anger.
You mean that fat shit that fell asleep outside your room? You'd be dead before he even got off his ass and out of that chair,
the voice informed her.
Leave me alone,
the girl said.
Maybe I will. Maybe I'll gut your little brother Jake and use him to spread my message instead,
the voice said with anger.
No! You leave him alone, you piece of shit! He's just a kid. I swear to God, if you touch him, I'll fucking end you. You hear me?
Mika said in anger, her heart rate rising as the monitor beside her began to register more and more frequently.
I'll leave him alone. Alone in a ditch covered in blood,
the voice said before hanging up on the terrified girl. Mika was in rough shape, but she had to do something. She had to save her brother. The girl removed her IV from her arm and unclipped the heart monitor from her finger before slipping her hospital slippers onto her feet and slowly opening the door to find that, indeed, the guard was asleep in his chair right outside her door. She moved right by him and he didn't even move, just kept snoring. The girl made her way down the hallway to the stairwell at the side, where she was able to slip past some nurses and right out the door at the side of the building. She was desperate to get to her brother and help him, to protect him, but as soon as the girl closed the door behind her, she was jabbed repeatedly with a new gut-hook blade of the Obituary killer, tearing through her flesh and eviscerating her insides before leaving her right there in a pool at the foot of the door. As the devil turned to move to his next target, he saw the doppelganger once again, standing there next to his truck. The hand brandishing a similar gut hook sat resting atop the bed of the truck. Jason shook his head and closed his eyes, attempting to make the hallucination go away, and when he opened his eyes once more, he was relieved to find that the phantom of his actions was no longer there, and all was back to normal once more. The devil climbed into his truck and removed his mask, still in a state of unease from what he kept seeing, but nonetheless still continued on with his plan, stopping off at the park where he had killed the others. It was roped off with police tape, but he crossed the line anyway in order to leave his mark. The blood-covered gut-hook knife lodged deep into the tree where some initials had been carved long ago. L.H. Lillian Harris. There he left the blade. It was for the message alone, and he had several others to choose from in order to enact his vengeance. There were only a few steps left in his plan, and immediately after killing Mika and leaving his mark, he moved on to the next one. Alicia Cunningham and her husband Sean lived in the house next door to the Harris household. They were a kind couple and had become good friends with Marge and Donald Harris over the past decade of living beside them. Their children had played together when they were younger, and before the Cunningham children had grown up and moved away, they were friends with Lillian for a time. The Obituary devil lurked outside between the houses, always glancing back at the Harris residence, the need for vengeance consuming him. His mind playing tricks on him even more now, distracting him. He thought he saw a dark-haired girl standing in the kitchen of the Harris house. His mind slipped for a moment, believing it to be Lillian, but when he looked again, he saw that it was just a mop standing upright in the closet. Another time he thought he saw the devil once more, but it was just a clock in the shadows. Continuously, he would see things, both inside and outside of the houses, movements in the shadows, matrixing in the darkness, tricking his eyes and his brain. The devil crept around behind the Cunningham residence and silently clicked the back door open, where he was able to slip inside. The absent-mindedness of Sean had left the back door unlocked, allowing the devil access to his home. The Obituary killer stalked quietly through the darkness of the kitchen, guided only by the light of the display screens on the kitchen appliances and the flickering of a television screen emanating from the room next door, where he found Sean asleep on the couch, snoring to reruns of old 80s TV shows. The devil raised his gut hook into the air and drove it down hard into the sleeping man's chest. He let out a small gasp as the air escaped his lungs one last time before the killer withdrew the knife, causing a splash of blood to swipe across the TV screen. The Obituary devil then turned and walked slowly up the stairs to find Alicia Cunningham asleep in her bed. But he didn't kill her. Not yet. Instead, he grabbed her cell phone off the end table beside her bed and clicked it on. No password. He smiled at the fact that this would be a piece of cake. The devil swiped through the woman's contacts to find Margie. This had to be Marge Harris. The killer then put the phone up to his ear and began calling the house next door, watching out the bedroom window for a response, and sure enough, within moments, a light flicked on in the bedroom upstairs in the house across the small yard, and his call was answered.
Alicia? Why are you calling so late? Are you okay?
Marge Harris answered in a groggy state.
Hello, Margie,
the devil said in that deep tone of voice from a modifier.
Alicia? Who is this?
Marge then asked, sounding more concerned.
She's right here, sound asleep, like a baby, and speaking of...
The devil spoke, his knife softly trailing over the sleeping woman's hair.
Where are your children, Mrs. Harris?
He then asked.
Why are you doing this? Leave her alone!
Marge yelled out, alerting her husband Donald and making him shoot awake in the bed beside her.
I mean, I know one of them is rotting in the ground. But where's the other one?
The killer asked.
Leave us alone!
Marge yelled as her husband questioned what was happening, to which she quickly turned to him to tell him that someone had broken into the house next door, to which the man hastily retrieved his gun from beside the safe and threw his slippers on to go help.
You shouldn't have done that, Margie,
the Obituary killer told her before ending the call and ripping Alicia from her bed to drag her to the open window. Marge flung the curtains open and stared through to see the Obituary devil holding a struggling Alicia by the hair. The killer waved his knife back and forth as if to say, "No, no, no," to Margie, before slashing the poor woman's throat right in front of her friend as he ripped her throat open with the hooked knife. He could swear he saw himself standing behind Marge Harris, in full costume, knife drawn and ready to strike. as if his fantasy was playing out right before his eyes as he killed the surrogate for his rage. Marge's screams could be heard from the street as Donald ran across the yard, where he found the front door locked. Quickly, he ran around to the back, and as he did so, Marge watched the killer disappear into the darkness.
No, no! Donald, don't go inside!
Marge yelled as she banged on the window, finding that she could not open it to warn her husband. Marge retrieved her house phone from beside the bedside and began to dial 911 as her husband entered the house next door. It was all dark inside, and the light in the kitchen would not work when Donald jiggled the switch. The older man moved slowly through the house, gun drawn, waiting for any sign of danger. A shadow moved in the office to Donald's left, where he fired off a shot into the darkness, hitting nothing but furniture. Another shadow moved in the living room, where he fired off 2 more shots, clearly hitting the figure with the sound of bullets tearing through flesh. The figure kept coming, though, causing the terrified man to let loose 3 more gunshots before the bullet-riddled corpse of Sean was thrown on top of his friend, causing the old guy to collapse on the floor under the dead weight. He tried to aim the gun at the figure that came next, but was stopped by a large boot on his wrist, crunching down into the bone until he lost his grip on the pistol and dropped it. The killer once again did that familiar taunt of the knife, as if saying, "Shame on you," to the older man, before flipping the knife around in his hand and driving it down into the screaming face of the pinned-down man, cutting off his screams and leaving Mrs. Harris alone to defend herself. Marge watched as the devil walked quietly out the back door of the home, where he then looked up at her before raising a hand and giving her a small open and closed wave, followed by Marge fleeing from the view of the window to find a place to hide and wait for the police to arrive. The obituary devil simply strolled along the small, white picket fence that separated the 2 homes, slowly dragging the gut hook along the wood fence, the blade thumping against each rung, leaving a trail of blood, until he came to its end, where he could pass through and cross the Harris yard before calmly walking up the steps and to the front door. The devil reached forward and turned the knob of the entranceway until clicking could be heard as the door came unlatched. Slowly, the door swung open, and Jason was met with the end of a gut-hook blade buried into his stomach. The teen looked up in shock to find a mirror image of himself, another's devil, staring back at him, head tilted to the side, eyes staring coldly into his own. The new devil reached out and removed Jason's mask to see the look of pain and shock upon his face. The new devil looked at him, and with a smile, she removed her mask. Jason's eyes filled with stunned rage as he fixated upon the ultimate target of his obsession. Lillian Harris was standing right in front of him, a knife buried into his gut, and he could do nothing to her.
"Wow, it worked out exactly as you planned," Marge said, stepping forward and placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I told you it would. I knew he'd come here eventually, and I taunted him just to make sure of it."
Lillian smirked as she twisted the blade, causing the boy to cough up a little blood.
"I called her as soon as the killing started up again," Marge explained. "She figured out pretty quickly that the messages were for her," she added, referring to her remaining living daughter. "You did make it pretty obvious, and news travels quick in this tiny town. Cops couldn't hide the details of your clues," Lillian said, getting a smile from the now gasping Jason. "You got what you wanted. Here I am, back home again. Not exactly what you had in mind, though, is it?" Lillian said, jerking the knife upward a bit, causing Jason to wince and growl in excruciating pain.
Lillian then leaned in close to Jason's ear and whispered,
"And you know what the real kicker is? You were right. I did kill your cousin. And now, I'm gonna kill you,"
she revealed, before leaning back to look at the shock upon his visage. Jason tried to pull his knife out, but could not find the energy to do much of anything with it. He was fading quickly.
You have to be careful when you're hunting. Sometimes the predator can become the prey,
Lillian said, before she ripped the gut hook outward, causing bits of Jason's insides to come with it, where he finally collapsed from his wounds.
Well, that just goes to show you, if you can't run away from the devil, run with him instead. But I hope you run right back here again next Saturday for more gore galore. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.